Thank you, Ron. And I'd also like to thank Gary and all of you tonight for coming out on the first sunny day of the last 2.5 years.
That's close.
Sure seems like that, doesn't it? Anyway, it is my great pleasure to be here with you tonight, and we've got a lot of things we have to talk about, and I want to try to go through them. I don't want to be long-winded about it, but I do want to cover the topic as quickly and as thoroughly as I can concerning the position of Attorney General. This particular year, I think is and I know a lot of you have heard it, that this is a very important electoral year. And of course, most people say that because we've had the most destructive, divisive president in American history in the White House for the last 3.5 years. And the damage he is doing, not only to the nation but to the whole world, it's unprecedented, and it has to be described as considerable. Okay. My campaign manager is counseling me. Okay. And I think you said something about us doing a Pledge of Allegiance before we get started. You want to lead that, Gary?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you for that. So, as we continue, I would say this to you, that not only is our national election important, but let's discuss the state of the state for a few minutes, because this is also not just, this isn't a business as usual environment. And I think many of you who are, one of the things about this particular group that I like speaking to this group is that you guys are very well informed and are up to speed on national and international issues. As you know, there is an economic meltdown going on in Europe right now. There's been runs on the banks in Greece, runs on the banks in Spain. You have a meltdown that's happening in France. Germany has already printed Deutsche Marks in anticipation of abandoning the euro. Pretty significant position. I just learned today that Russia, China, and Iran are planning on staging the largest war games ever held in the Middle East in Syria by the end of the month. And Iran has already petitioned to get 25 warships through the Suez Canal today. We have a president that has launched cruise missiles illegally in at least 4 sovereign nations, and who is killing civilians with drones without any congressional backing or authority. And apparently he sits around in his living room in the White House with his family and picks who's next to be on the kill list. He already killed a 19-year-old American girl in Yemen. No trial, no arrest, no authority. And no one in Congress has said anything about it. Well, that's all fine and dandy to speak on the national level, but what about the state level? Some of these things are influential as to what's going to happen to us statewide. Some states have already addressed the issue and are moving ahead with on a sovereign assertion, if you will. For instance, North Dakota. North Dakota is sitting at a 3.4% unemployment rate. They have an economy that's thriving. And they've also began to move into their own currency. Now, this is North Dakota. Now, they are becoming sufficient when we in our state are sitting at a 20% unemployment rate. We have a mountain of debt. The state is $42 billion in the hole. Now, I know those numbers are disputed. It depends on who you look at. The Policy Center, Washington Policy Center, says $27 billion. Either way, it's a lot different than the zero that's constitutionally mandated in a state that is supposed to balance its budget every year. Somehow, over the last 8 years, with Christine Gregoire at the helm, we've gone from a $4 billion surplus to a $27 billion hole. Now, that's what I would call a train wreck. And in the meantime, you have to ask yourself the question, do any of these government services actually function? Did she bring anything new to the state that's encouraging investment, employment? Well, obviously not, because we have an employment rate that is roughly 7 times higher than North Dakota. How'd that happen? It's called mismanagement. Now we have other difficulties that are facing us. For instance, we have what Ron Paul called an emerging dictatorship under Barack Obama. Now those aren't my words, that's what Ron Paul said about where Barack Obama is. In addition to that, we have the very serious situation from Japan and what's happened with Fukushima. Fukushima is an ongoing problem. You know that there is enough debris the size of the state of California that is washing ashore on Washington and Oregon coasts. That's a lot of debris. In addition to that kind of debris blowing ashore on Washington coasts, you have this little problem with radiation leaking from Fukushima 4. Now Fukushima 4 has 4,000 tons of spent fuel rods that are sitting up on the 4th floor of the building that is in 70% collapse mode right now. If that collapses, it will be an unprecedented event for humanity. Unprecedented. No one will have ever seen anything like it. And Washington is a direct target of that radiation. When Fukushima initially melted down, there was a substantial body of radiation that went up into the Aleutian chain and then coasted along the southern coast of Alaska and down the Pacific Rim, all over the West Coast. Measurements in California right now are 668 times higher than accepted norms of radiation. They found radiation in tuna, radiation in strawberries, radiation in kelp, radiation in breast milk, radiation in cow milk. So we may be facing a bit of a crisis. Now, in addition to that, as I mentioned when I first began these remarks, we have an economic meltdown going on in Europe. Our money since Richard Nixon has not been backed by anything. It used to be we had at least a little bit of a gold standard going on, but that was cut free in 1973 under Richard Nixon. And as a result, the currency has its value based solely on the fact that all oil is traded in dollars. And we have mandated that by force. And so when people say, well, no wars for oil, we're not fighting for oil. We're fighting for having the oil sold in American currency. That's what we're fighting for. And and where has that placed us? Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Libya, Tunisia, Somalia, Sudan, Bahrain, Jordan, and now we're about to enter into Syria. None of those wars, by the way, Tunisia, Libya, Sudan, Somalia, Yemen, and Jordan, were not approved by Congress. Barack Obama is in violation of the War Powers Act and has committed a treasonable offense by not notifying Congress after delivering 110 cruise missiles into Libya. And the assassination of Muammar Gaddafi is considered a crime against humanity and a war crime. In addition to that, Mr. Obama has participated in other crimes against humanity in Kenya, where he has taken American tax dollars and forced the Kenyan government to accept Sharia law and late-term abortion, or they don't get any foreign aid. He also participated in ethnic genocide in Kenya when he funded his cousin Raila Odinga and the riots that were staged following the election in 2008 when Raila Odinga lost the election. He's part and parcel of all of that. He was part and parcel of the empowerment of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. He spoke to the Muslim Brotherhood in April of 2009 and told them in Arabic, "I am one of you." That's what he said in Arabic. Now, for him to say that is interesting because the Muslim Brotherhood was formed in 1928 with the sole purpose of recreating the Ottoman Empire, the Caliphate. They funded and created Hamas. They funded and created Al-Qaeda. They funded and created Hezbollah. And Mr. Obama invites them personally to the meeting to tell them, "I am one of you." It turns out last week, he just funded them $1.5 billion worth of American tax dollars in order to help them, I guess, supply up for the coming war between Egypt and Israel, which, by the way, is breaking out. Israel just moved tanks to the Egyptian border. So what you see is you see a panicked administration doing all kinds of crazy things, trying to support a dollar that may lose its value catastrophically. Now, as some of the other candidates that I've been on the trail with have said, if the dollar collapses, here's what it looks like. All the money you have in the bank disappears, and all your debts are restated in the new currency. Your money's gone, but the bills aren't. That's what happened in Argentina. That's what happened in the Weimar Republic. Now, the Weimar Republic also superinflated their currency to the point where people would come in and say, can you please pay me in the morning so I can buy my bread before tonight when it's priced out of sight? And they would literally be paid by weight in wheelbarrows full of Deutschmarks. All of those things are possible. So the question is, what do we do in the state of Washington? That's a big issue. What do we do in the state of Washington? And a lot of that has to do with a concerted management effort, but part of it has to do with who we are as a people. This is a very important thing. Who we are as a people. Are we a civilized people? Are we a moral people? Are we people under a rule of law? Do we accept any of those premises? Or are we a people who just do what we can get away with? Those are good questions. Because if we're going to be a moral people, if we're going to sustain ourselves as a nation state, we must be a moral people. And we must be a lawful people. As I've said on the campaign trail many times, either we are a godly, lawful people, or we are a godless, lawless people. And I can tell you, having spent time, I spent some time in the Soviet Union after it collapsed. And, there was no law. And because there was no law, there was no morality. And because there was no morality, there was nothing but mafia. Right. So here's the way it worked. The economy completely collapsed. The currency completely collapsed. So then they started using counterfeit Iranian American $100 bills that were being printed in Iran with the printer that Jimmy Carter gave the Shah. That became this currency, the staple of currency in Russia. And the mafia would just shoot you. That's how the economy of scale worked. They would shoot you. If they came to do a political deal with you, they'd walk up to you and say, we're buying your business. Well, for how much? Irrelevant. We're buying your business. You're going to take this satchel of money without counting it. If you say no, we kill you. And that's what happened. That was what became the rule of law in Russia. Now we're above that. We're above that as a people. We're smarter than that as a people. And we can do this thing no matter what comes at us. But we have to make a commitment towards those things. Now this is why I talk about things godly in the campaign. This is part of the reason why I brought the 1192 petition to declare marriage to be between one man and one woman. This is an important part of who we are because we have to establish and reestablish the family unit. Now, I've talked at length about the family, and I can tell you that sometimes the family is not the most joyous place to be, especially if you've got a tyrannical grandmother or grandfather, ruling the roost with a cane or something. A lot of people wanted freedom from that, but I can tell you that the family unit is the most effective tool of defense against the rise of the tyrannical state. Okay? I mean, it's just that simple. You have a state which is put at bay because of the strength of the families, which is multi-generational, and the state knows it. That's why the state is at war with the family. Because if the state can destroy the family unit and take your children away from you and put them in a collective daycare where they can brainwash them from 6 months old on, then they can turn the kids against the parents. The parents are never in bond with the kids. The children never inherit from the parents, so the state can hit you with a huge tax on your, the death tax on your inheritance, which they do, right? At one time it was 90% inheritance tax in this country. 90% inheritance, and that's a tax on everything you've earned after tax over your lifetime. The state says, we'll take that, thank you. We'll take that and we'll take your children away from you. Why? To make sure that there is no legacy that sustains from generation to generation. If they can do that, then they have destabilized the social unit. The social unit then becomes dependent upon government. Once they've destabilized the social unit, then you start plugging in welfare, and you can divide child from parent or through the generations, and then you control. Now there's no loyalty, there's no family bloodline, there's just the state and you. This is why when people say, well, come on, my same-sex marriage isn't going to affect you. No, it's going to affect the entire country, which is what it has done. People say, well, you know, look, come on. There's no problem with the civil right. Well, take a look at what happened in Norway, or look at what happened in Canada. Once you decriminalize, or not decriminalize, but once you say, let's go ahead and establish marriage for same-sex partners, okay, well, people in their age, in the 20s, their marriages just go out the window. They stop getting married. There is no value in marriage. They stop getting married, which means that the incidence of children being born out of wedlock goes through the roof. Well, that's the ideal. We've got two ideals here. One, if any kids are going to be born, we want them to be born out of wedlock so that we can control them from the state. And then the people that get into same-sex relationships won't have any kids at all, which is where we want it to be because we don't want any kids here. Which allows me to segue into my next topic, which is Agenda 21. Now, I was speaking about this earlier tonight. I've written a book on this subject. It's called Behold the Pale Green Horse. And don't buy it tonight, but on the 4th of July, the second edition will be available. And it's definitely worth reading. And it discusses all of the intellectual groundwork behind the global warming movement. And this intellectual groundwork, I mean, I got to tell you, when I first started this book, I wrote 144 pages, and I said, that's pretty argumentative. Maybe I better, you know, source it and find out what I'm talking about. And so I started, any factual claim that I made, I just wanted to find out, okay, anybody else say that? Well, by the time I was done, it was 460-something sources. And the book was much worse than what I thought it was. Much, much worse. Now, I can tell you that the modern global warming movement begins with a pastor, a Presbyterian pastor named Malthus. Okay, he came up with what's called a Malthusian edict. And his basic claim is that as soon as Eve was put on the earth, there was one too many people. There was enough resources for Adam to survive, but once Eve got here, too many people, too few resources. Now, the economic nonsense of this is incredible because what he's talking about is the laws of supply and demand and what creates a price point. But for him, it was too many people. And so he's the first one to say that mankind will always produce too many people for the resources that are on Earth. And in his view, 2 was too many. But as you get into the 20th century, you have people arise that are really genocidal. The top dog on the list was Bertrand Russell. Now, Bertrand Russell was an incredibly evil person. I mean, I'm just going to say that. I've read his stuff. There's a book, a 1951 book called The Impact of Science on Society. And in that book, Bertrand Russell describes his ideal social order. Let's see if this rings any bells. One world government, totalitarian, very small elite, and they are aggressive and intelligent. But the people that are ruled, which is everybody else, are passive, smaller, not so smart, laid back, and they're worker bees. Now, to keep them happy, to keep their bloodlust happy, you engage in human sacrifice. So you have another race of people that are bred expressly for the purpose of human sacrifice. The total worldwide population, 150 million people. He wanted to completely depopulate the continent of Africa, to give you an example. He was the one that advised Chamberlain to appease Hitler, Bertrand Russell. Now, this is the godfather of the global warming movement. 150 million people on Earth. He wants 150 million more people than Prince Philip of England, who wants no people. Prince Philip said, I want to come back as a virus and kill every single human being. He hates humanity with a purple passion. Then you can go to Ted Turner. He wants 500 million. We think he's responsible for the Georgia Guidestones. Anybody familiar with that? The Georgia Guidestones? It's a monument like Stonehenge or, you know, something like that. It's stones, you know, therefore it means something. Maybe it's a Rosetta Stone, I don't know. But anyway, he's got it up in Georgia. And this stone says, you know, there should only be 500 million people on Earth. And then he goes through this secular humanist agenda, which means totalitarian government, this is justice, we decide who lives and who dies. And then that is followed by the current movement. Now, the current movement wants to see about 5 to 6 billion people eradicated in the next decade or so. And Bertrand Russell tells you how to do it. If the population gets too large, the first order of business is to starve them to death. Now, if that doesn't work, then you hit him with disease, like tainted vaccines, sterilization processes, so on and so forth. And then if that doesn't work, nuke him. Now, those are his proposals. But he's not the only one that said it. There's a woman named Thomason who's in the White House right now, whose Harvard thesis was the morality of using nuclear weapons to control population. That was her Harvard thesis. So you have a group of people who go to bed at night thinking, how can we take out 2 billion this year? Okay? Now our good friend Henry Kissinger proposed a doctrine called NSSM 200 in 1973, which really ticked off the Muslim world. If you want to know why the Muslims went terrorist, it was because of SSM 200 that said, oh, you people need to be sterilized. We want abortion in all of your countries. We want only one-child policies in all of your countries. And we want as many of your women sterilized as we can get. That was the official doctrine of the United States government in 1973, foreign policy, under Henry Kissinger. Well, as you might imagine, that upset the Muslim world who doesn't believe in homosexuality or abortion. Now think about how smart the Muslims are. Let's get into Europe. Okay, we're in, now what? Well, I can tell you one thing, we're not practicing abortion. But we're sure going to advocate it for those infidels. You guys abort your children, we're going to have our birth rate at 8.0, and we're going to get your birth rate to 0.8. And that's exactly what the situation is right now. So the French are disappearing out of France, the Spanish are disappearing out of Spain, the Germans are disappearing out of Germany, and so on and so forth, while the Muslim population just detonates. To the point that most of the people in the Middle East refer to Europe as Eurabia. We have the same plunging demographic here in the United States. We just don't chart it, but we have the same plunging demographic because of the stupidity of the practice of abortion. Now, the first rule of warfare, this isn't Sun Tzu, although most people study Sun Tzu for warfare. But the first rule of warfare is this. When you have an attacking army, count how many troops are there. Then count how many troops you have and determine whether or not you're going to broker a truce. Right? That's the first rule of warfare. Well, think about it for a second. You're Canada, second largest nation in the world. You have 30 million people. China, running out of fresh water. 1.5 billion people. Who should practice abortion? Canada? I mean, it's the world's dumbest decision. Okay? So, I mean, even pagan societies represented this. And so, this is why I call us to a godly concern and a lawful concern. Now, there's one other reason why I said we need to be a godly, lawful nation. And it has to do with the Declaration of Independence. I ask people all the time, okay, 1776, here's the condition. Every nation in the Western world recognizes the law of nations. The law of nations says that inside the nation state there is no law superior to ours. In other words, the French aren't going to tell the English how to run the city of London, and the English aren't going to tell the Germans how to run Berlin. The state is its ultimate sovereign authority. That's the law of nations. So, given that England lawfully held the 13 colonies in 1776, how many people believe that our revolution was lawful? How many believe it was unlawful? How many people don't know?
Depends on whose law you're talking about.
Well, I mean, that's right, right? But I can tell you, to the founders, this was a critical question.
The law of God.
Is it lawful to revolt?
Yes.
And we asserted that it was. We asserted that it was in the very first sentence of the Declaration of Independence. Now, if you understand that, when you hear this, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the bands that connect them to another, and to assert among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. We asserted our right to exist as a separate nation under the laws of nature and nature's God. Now, if we don't believe in the laws of nature and nature's God, We don't have a right to be independent any longer. You see this? We were either lawfully broken away from England, or we have no lawful right to break away from England. Now, if we have no lawful right, we're just a criminal nation, a criminal rogue nation. The founders thought that to be very, very important. So they said, look, we're justified because there is a law that is superior to the law of nations, which is the law of nature and of nature's God. Well, that's an interesting buzzword. You know, in the legal world, we call that a term of art. That's a term of art. What does that mean? Well, somebody painted it onto some text somewhere. No, that's not what it means. What happened was, the concept was coined, and the concept was coined by a fellow named Jean Bodin, 1575, 6 books of the Commonwealth. Jean Bodin was a monk, went to study with John Calvin in Geneva for 12 years, went back to Paris, became a lawyer, and his life work was to determine what was the basis of law in the Western world, Greek or Latin. Was it Aristotle and Plato, or was it Justinian's Corpus Juris Civilis? Which one was it? Greek, Latin, Latin, Greek, Greek, Latin, and it turns out it was Hebrew. Because it was Moses bringing the law down on Sinai, which is the basis of law throughout the entire world. And these 10 principles that I call the Decalogue, the 10 principles, the 10 words, these 10 principles are not really commandments, which is a really bad misnomer. They're 10 metaphysical realities. They're 10 metaphysical premises. For instance, when you say, hey, under the Constitution I have a right to life. Do you? Where's that found? People say, well, the Fifth Amendment. The Fifth Amendment says that life, liberty, and property cannot be taken. Except, there's always the exception. Except by due process. Right? And property, it requires just compensation. So what are your rights under the Fifth Amendment? Due process and just compensation. You don't have a right to life, liberty, or property. The state can take it. What you have a right to is due process and just compensation. That's what you have a right to. I want you to think about that the next time you're in court. And the judge says, due process, we don't need that here. Let's waive that and move on. That's the only right you have. That's the only thing standing between you and the tyranny of the state, is due process. But when we say there's a right to life, we mean it. And where does it come from? It comes from thou shalt not kill. So you have a supernatural authority that says thou shalt not kill. That creates the prohibition. From the prohibition stems the right, because if God said it, who is man to overturn it? The right applies to every human life. You see? And this is where the right comes from. Where the right to property springs from the edict, thou shalt not steal. And so when you see that these rights are derived from this 10 Commandments, this is why Jean Bodin said, look, I'm going to call it what it is. The laws of nature's God. Those laws. Those are the ones. Now, when we look at this a little bit tighter, you'll see that the laws of nature are what are called the metaphysical laws, like gravity, like entropy. Those are metaphysical laws, those metaphysical properties, those are the laws of nature. The laws of nature is God, more specific, the Decalogue. Now the founders said, by these laws, we are justified. By these laws, we are lawful. If we get rid of those laws, we're not lawful. Now the British barristers, 4 months ago, were in Washington, D.C. arguing, well, you guys really don't have a lawful claim to be independent. The Queen's back barking at the door. Knock, knock, knock. We want you back. We know there's tax resources here. We want you back. And what did we say? Did anybody make the argument? No, we are justified under a higher authority? No. No one at that particular debate did. But we did make the argument at Nuremberg when we executed the Nazis. We told them, they said, hey, listen, American, we're moral. We were obeying the law of nations. We were just taking orders. We were obeying the governing authorities. We said, we're going to execute you. So did we commit murder? Or was it lawful? It was lawful. Why was it lawful? Because we told them there is an authority superior to the law of nations and the sovereign authority of the state. Now, I'm just going to summarize this whole discussion by saying that when the authority of God is over the state, we have freedom. When the authority of the state is over God, we have fascism. Okay? This is where we are. This is where our leadership has been in Olympia for the last 8 years. Governor Gregoire mocking God, claiming she's a Catholic while she votes in secular humanism at an unprecedented level and drives us into bankruptcy. That's what we've had. So, where we're going now with the new state government is here. We have several plans to recreate a vital economy in the state. Now, part of that making the state vital includes sequestering fresh water. It also includes increasing our electrical output. Barack Obama says, well, you need to shut down some of those windmills. They're creating too much electricity. Well, why are they creating too much electricity? Because your rates are starting to go down. Obviously, you've got too much supply if your rates are going down. So shut some of that down. The reality is we could increase the output of the dams in the state by 800% by simply replacing the generators. If we do that, bada boom. Electric rates plummet. If electric rates plummet, who knows? Maybe Kaiser Aluminum comes back in the state and hires. If we sequester fresh water, of course we need to sequester fresh water. You know what kind of water crisis is going on worldwide right now? The aquifer in the central United States is almost completely dried up. Lake, what is the name of that lake outside of Atlanta? Lake Lucille? Oh no, that's Lake. Anyway, that particular lake, which supplies all of Atlanta, huge lake, 3 years ago, dried up. Colorado River's going away. I mean, the aquifers in California dry. Now, the question is, you got to ask yourself the question: is this a problem, or should we just ignore it because it's raining here today? Now, that's a question you can ask yourself about 360 days a year. But the problem is that if we have fresh water coming ashore, we need to sequester that water. You know, in Israel, there's not a drop of water that escapes from anywhere. No way. They control every drop. If we had that same kind of technology here, we would not allow this water to go washing back out into the salinated ocean, where it cannot be used for freshwater purposes. It's an important part. Now, another thing that could be done, you know, Maria Cantwell has gone out of her way to block commerce with the state of Alaska. They have those dirty oil tankers, and we don't want those dirty oil tankers here at all. So she blocked all kinds of pipelines, the oil tankers from coming in here. Well, Alaskans say, well, look, we're prepared to deal with those dirty oil tankers and that dirty pipeline. That dirty pipeline, which has given such an economic boom to Alaska, there are no income taxes, there are no sales taxes, and the state pays a check to every resident. All from the taxes that are garnered from that particular pipeline. Would it behoove us to do something similar? Well, look, if you have, you know, but you got to understand, the natural gas in the oil market works like it's a giant puddle, and everybody dips into it, right? If we became a port terminal for the oil and gas that's coming out of North Dakota, Montana, Colorado, Wyoming, which is now the largest field in the world, by the way, that would be a huge economic boom to the state of Washington. But we may not be smart enough to do it because we want to have non-human affected wilderness. How many people do you know of who are losing property in this state right now because of EPA regulations? The 500-foot setback, it's going to take 60% of Washington's farmlands. 500-foot setback, 60% of the farmlands out. Now, some of those conditions are, hey, here's a 500-foot setback. Well, my property is only 600 feet wide. Right, tear down your house. And not only that, but we don't want limited use where you can hike through here or camp or backpack or ride a horse. No, 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 no. No human use. Don't even think about going in there. You can't go in there because that has to be kept aside for who?
Oregon spotted frog.
Yeah, the spotted frog, right? You know, and of course that nonsense. You know, I can tell you the agenda behind Agenda 21 is what I told you. What Burton Russell's vision was. The agenda behind Agenda 21 is for no people to live here. Have you seen the map? Who's seen the Agenda 21 map? Right? Shows 90% of Washington totally uninhabited. Totally uninhabited. So if you're a farmer, you know, move into an apartment building downtown Belltown or Tacoma where you can catch a train to work or die. And this is their concerted agenda. It's not, they're not kidding around. They are launching this. This is why they're trying to put salt water up the Stillaguamish, while they're trying to put salt water up the Snohomish, while they're trying to put salt water up the Skagit. This is why they've torn down levees and they've allowed salt water to come in over freshwater aquifers. Salt water over a freshwater aquifer. A federal judge has ruled you can tear down dams on the Columbia. They're trying to tear down the 3 dams at Klamath Falls. They've torn down dams out here on the Olympic Peninsula. Why are they doing that? Because they don't want you to have fresh water. They don't want you to have electricity. They don't want you to be able to farm. They want this land vacant with no human beings living here. That's why they cut off all the fresh water to the San Joaquin Valley in California. It's a desolation.
They own the water, though.
Yeah, well, according to them.
Yeah.
So when you have this kind of constitutional encroachment, what can we do at a state level? That's a question. That's a question. Now, there are plenty of things that we can do, because what's happening now is there's a 10th Amendment movement that's taking place across the states. There's a lot of states involved in this. Cuccinelli, who's the Attorney General of Virginia, the one who called the Obama administration the single largest criminal cabal in American history. And that's an accurate description. But he's joined with 16 other attorney generals who are taking positions that are very strident in terms of promoting 10th Amendment freedoms. Now, just briefly, the way this works is that you have, when the nation was created, we had a system of checks and balances, executive, judicial, legislative branches, checking and balancing each other. But there's a 4th check and balance, which is the system of federalism. That is 50 sovereign nations under one umbrella that is called the federal government, which is supposed to be limited in size and in scope and should only have certain enumerated powers. Now that's what's written. The enumerated powers are in Article 1, Section 8, and if it doesn't appear there, you don't have it. Now I could tell you, you can't find anywhere in the Constitution that says the federal government has the right to hold a state park, or a federal park, or a wildlife refuge. You can't find it. They have the right to postal roads, forts, armories, and naval shipyards, and Washington, D.C. That's it. They can't own anything else, and yet they've taken all of the West. What is it? Something like 80% of Utah is locked up. 2.5 times the state of California is locked up in the state of Alaska under federal rubric. By what constitutional principle? None. Overreach. And now they think that they can take everybody from the Rockies out and tell you, depopulate. Move to Iowa or don't live there. And the way to handle that is with the assertion of state rights under the 10th Amendment. And under the 10th Amendment it says, all rights not delegated to the federal government are reserved to the states or to the people thereof. We will do that. Under my leadership in the Attorney General's office, we will do that. So I want to talk briefly, just for a second, about my opponents. Now I'm running against, I think there's 3 of us that have filed that got on the map. There was a 4th guy for a while, but he didn't make it. And so there's 3 of us. There's me, and then there's Reagan Dunn, who's a councilman in King County, and Bob Ferguson, who's a councilman in King County. So you have 2 King County guys and me. And the situation is very clearly this. The Attorney General's job is a civil litigation position. Okay? So if this was medicine, you'd say, okay, this is heart surgery. So you wouldn't want to put in somebody who does bone work in a heart surgeon's position. Okay? That's the same case we have here. Now, Reagan Dunn comes out of a prosecutor's office, and for the first 1.5 years of this campaign, he believed that the Attorney General's office was the top prosecutor in the state. And it's not. The prosecutors are in the counties. The Attorney General may from time to time intervene in a criminal case to prosecute it, but it's not a prosecutor's position. And his skill set, of course, comes from a prosecutorial background. He was a prosecutor before he entered the Ashcroft Justice Department in George Bush's first term. Since then, he's been working with the King County Council. Bob Ferguson has never litigated ever. He has a bar license. He's never appeared in court. So you have essentially two career politicians who are saying, I'm the guy for Attorney General. But if you look at the Attorney General caseload, guess what it is? It's cases. If you walk, you say, what's the job here today? Here, give me the top 100 lawyers here. There's 700 lawyers at the AG's office. How's that for a small army? I think we can take Idaho with that many people. But you get the top 100 lawyers together. So let's get in here. What's the work look like? Well, the work looks like this case, this case, this case, this case, this case, this one. We got this case, that case, this case, that case. And that's basically what the work looks like. Well, now, if you're a career politician, what do you say? Okay, well, who's the smart guy around here? Oh, you. Okay, handle it. I'll talk to the press. Everything's looking great. Right? Does that sound like the kind of job that you want to have done? What needs to be done at the Attorney General's office is somebody who can pull up the case and say, okay, what's the condition of this case right here? What's the cause of action? Is this frivolous? Does it have a chance in the court? Who's litigating it? How old is it? Is it stale? What's its procedural process? What does the docket look like? How much money do we have into it? Should it be dismissed? I guarantee you there's a bunch of cases there that are make-work cases that need to be dismissed and put away. Clean the desk. But if you have somebody who has a prosecutorial background, now, I'm just going to share this with you. In the criminal law, the cases are, usually your case file is about that thick. That's it. You walk in and you say, not guilty. And the prosecutor hands you what they have. Here's our case file, which is never all they have, but that's all you're going to get. And they hand this to you, you say, there you go, here's your case file. And they got one staple in it, and you're looking at it. And then they hand you the plea. Here's the plea, take it or leave it. If you don't take it, I'm going to put your guy in Yakima. Right? And then your guy has to stand up and say, I wasn't coerced at all in entering into this plea agreement. Right? But the reality is that in the criminal courts, the paperwork is small. It is small. That's what goes on. But when you get into civil litigation, when we filed the R71 complaint, which my buddy Larry Stickney will verify, we filed a complaint that was about like that. That was the opening salvo. Now, once you put in another 25 depositions, then you put in the initial motion to dismiss, and then you follow that with the initial summary judgment motion, and the second summary judgment motion, and then the interlocutory appeal, and then the blah, 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 blah. Case file's that tall. That's a bit different than criminal work. You see that? And what happens is, now let me give you an example how this applies in the AG's office. Suppose we're dealing with consumer fraud, and the consumer fraud at issue is mortgage fraud. And we've had a mortgage lender who was out running up the value of real estate using a fraudulent appraiser who just went out and gave whatever numbers he wants. And so you want to come in as the AG and you want to police that consumer fraud. Say, you know what, you've been engaged in fraud in this market and you've driven our banks out of business. And so I want to look at this. Well, what if one of them's dropped into bankruptcy? If you're a criminal lawyer, you may not know that 365 of the rules of bankruptcy provides for an automatic stay. What happens if you're dealing with a guy who's got 25 corporations and you want to bring him in? Would you want to have a CR 30B6 representative from each corporation? And what about service of process? What if it's an international client? Are you going to meet the provisions of the Hague Convention or not? A criminal lawyer isn't going to know those things because they haven't practiced those things. Okay? And that's why the civil litigation position is really critical that you have a civil litigation lawyer there. And so, I mean, this is my skill set. So I could tell you, initially I wasn't criticizing Reagan Dunn, but he just does not have the skill set, and his skill set is 100-fold more than Bob Ferguson's. And so that's how the AG office would run. Now, under my supervision, we would dismiss a lot of the peripheral nonsense. It would just go away. We're not going to use the office to harass people on specious consumer protection claims when there are employers trying to keep people employed in this state. When we have egregious consumer protection claims, we will go after it. Now let me give you an example. How many people have eaten at Taco Bell? Beef taco?
Not sawdust.
Yeah. Yeah, but come on. You know, you eat at Taco Bell for a few years and then you find out that your all-beef taco is 80% sawdust? Does that strike you as a consumer protection claim? It does me. If it says beef, I want beef. I don't want sawdust. Now, you might say, well, look, sawdust is innocuous. Okay. What about flavor additives in some of the soft drinks that are made from human embryo tissue?
I read about it, folks. It's true.
How does that sound? Should we be quietly engaged in Soylent Green? Little cannibalism here with nobody telling us?
1973.
Should we? I think that's a consumer protection issue, but it gets worse. Red Bull, energy drinks. Active ingredient, taurine. Do you know what it is? Does the phrase Rocky Mountain oyster mean anything to you?
Yes.
That's where taurine is derived.
If you're from Montana, you know.
I'm just trying to give you an idea. And I think some of this stuff, this is a valid consumer protection issue. Let me tell you something else. Most of the shrimp that comes into the country comes from China. Do you know how much of that shrimp is human fertilized? Do we have any protection in place to protect the Washington consumer as to what he's eating? Shouldn't we have fair and full disclosure as to our food supply? That's another question. I think that's an important priority for the Attorney General's office, to protect that. Now, in addition to that, the Attorney General gets paid to issue opinions. This is the place when I was 10 years old where I always wanted to be. Well, you know, Mom, in my opinion, we're not interested in your opinion. You're just a kid. Now shut up. But now as the Attorney General, hey, I could get paid, not only get paid, but my opinion could be respected. Let me give you an example. First opinion out of the chute is an opinion that would comport with two other AG opinions, which is that signatures on an initiative or a petition are the equivalent of a vote and should be kept private. That's the first opinion. Second opinion, that the ballots that currently have barcodes on them are impermissibly in violation of the Washington Constitution because they're not absolutely secret. If your ballot is being counted in one of the machines, ooh, jammed up, oh, let's pull it out of there, rip, rip, rip. Well, how do we count that ballot? Oh, no problem. Scan the barcode and send them a new one. Well, if they can scan the barcode with your vote on it, is your vote secret?
No.
No. Do you like the idea of somebody sitting in a back room in state government going, well, how did so-and-so vote over the last 10 years? Republican, Republican, Independent, Republican, Republican, Independent. They're not getting this job. Right? That's why it's important that the vote be absolutely secret. Now, Antonin Scalia at the U.S. Supreme Court didn't get that. When we were arguing the R-71 case at the Supreme Court, he's screaming, look, when are you people in California going to get it? And finally somebody says, hey, Judge, it's Washington. Oh, I guess maybe I should have read that. You know, you people need to have some civic courage out there. You know, it used to be that the vote was totally public in this country. You didn't have any right to privacy at all. You had to vote right in public. Yeah, Judge, and that was followed by the Civil War. And I said, furthermore, where did you get off talking about having civic courage when you just hired 23 new bodyguards? Easy for you to have civic courage. How about the rest of us that are facing people coming by the house at midnight? Right? But the point is that Washington voters, under concepts of federalism and under the Republican form of government, adopted a constitution that says we want our vote to be absolutely secret. It's not subject to somebody's opinion or second guessing at the Supreme Court. That's what the Washington Constitution says, and that's what the state of Washington has to live up to. And that means that when you sign your name on a petition or on an initiative, it needs to be kept secret. Now, how about this opinion? For those of us who like the Department of Ecology. Wonderful organization. Next year they're coming out, their new uniforms are brown Anyway, anyway, the Department of Ecology. How about this for an opinion? Well, let's see. For those of you that know the Agenda 21 movement, you know that it's actually a religious movement. They, in about 1980, Prince Philip, in his wisdom, decided to fund an organization called the World Wildlife Fund. That organization spawned a group called the Church of Euthanasia, a religious group that preaches suicide as a solution to a world population. And then later, in about 1982, this concept of Gaia was introduced. Gaia, Mother Earth. Then this girl builds this Ark of Hope. It's like the Ark of the Covenant, except it's for the religion of Gaia worship. Gaiaism, the worship of the Mother Earth, and all of its progeny, which includes the Earth Charter, is a religion. And this is not the first time this religion's been around. Worshipping Mother Earth has been around for a long time, but it is a religion. And so one of the opinions that I would issue as Attorney General is to declare that the use of any of that Earth Charter Gaiaism in any state document or policy is a breach of the strict separation of church and state. We'd see some interesting things there. Finally, we need to have some disclosure inside the educational system. Now let me give you an example. You know that down here in Lake Stevens, they got caught with a history book that had 7 chapters of Islamic instruction.
Yep.
So the children in middle school were encouraged to take on an Arab name, get down on the prayer mat, pray to Mecca, and give the Muslim confession of faith. Now in Islam, once you give the Muslim confession of faith, you're Muslim whether you believed it, whether you intended it, or whatever. And once you're Muslim, if you try to convert back to Christianity or something else, that's apostasy. The death sentence is warranted. Okay? They were teaching that with the textbooks in Lake Stevens. I think that needs to be disclaimed. How about this? Since racism is not taught in our public schools, let's talk about the science class that teaches Darwin's book. What's the name of that again? The Origin of... Wait a minute. Give me the whole name. The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or the Preservation of Preferred Races in the Struggle for Life. What? We're teaching the preservation of preferred races in the struggle for life at our colleges? That's correct. Mandated curriculum in all of Washington schools. Shouldn't that be disclaimed? Shouldn't that be disclosed? Yes, it should. So anyway, these are the policies. This is what my platform is. I'm telling you what I would do as Attorney General. We would assert states' rights. We would push for economic freedom. We would let the farmers farm, the employers employ. We would work to roll back the excesses of government, to create a lean machine inside the Attorney General's office. You know, we go to 150 high-powered guys. How's that sound? And we have 150 high-powered guys who then have a little bit of discretion in determining exactly what cases we're going to bring and what cases we're not going to bring. One of the cases, by the way, that would be immediately dismissed is the Stormans case. This is a case that's been going on for 5 years, where Christine Gregoire had decided that she wants Obama's health care mandate here. And so she told the pharmacies, if you want to be a licensed pharmacy, you're going to sell the abortion pill. Now, if she wins that battle, the next step is if you want to be an adoptive agency, you're going to place kids in homosexual homes. If you want to be a hospital, you're going to perform late-term abortions. If you want to be a licensed this or a licensed that or a licensed the other thing, you will perform according to our secular edicts, not according to your religious freedom of conscience. That's what this battle is all about. And she's taken the Stormans to task for 5 years, $2 million worth of state money, and has ran them up a bill of $500,000 out of their own pocket, even though the judge has told her unconstitutional, unconstitutional, and unconstitutional. When I get elected Attorney General, dismissed with prejudice. Questions?
It's my understanding that the Stormans sued the state. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And the Attorney General is now appealing it.
This is the second appeal.
Right. So what is his rationale for appealing it?
Well, here's the way it works. If you're, and a lot of you guys may be in this situation. Suppose, for instance, that you have somebody hit you with a Growth Management Act move on your farm. Or suppose somebody comes in and determines that you have wetland on your property. Or suppose you have somebody that comes in and rules on the Clean Water Act. Or maybe it's some other state law, but it is now going to take everything you want. And so what are your choices? You sue. And so you sue the state, you sue Sam Reed or the Department of Health or the Department of Transportation or whoever it may be, and you bring a lawsuit and you go into the court and you say, Judge, you need to order them to stop. Give me an injunction and block them. Tell them to hold their horses. So the judge does. Well, that's your choice. That's your only option. But because you sued the state, now the state comes in and says, well, that's interesting, because as you know, balanced budget restrictions don't apply to us anymore. So we now have an unlimited pocketbook to grind you right into pulp. So you, taxpayer, you need to have as much money as we have, because we can run that litigation machine at $100,000 a month against you as a taxpayer. And so you say, all right, well, let's see what we can do. And so you ask the state to hold up, and the next thing you know, the Attorney General is using the office as a hammer against the taxpayer. That isn't going to happen under me. No way. I mean, I could tell you, there's a case out there that says the Attorney General has to represent both sides of the issue, particularly when there's a constitutional issue. So if the Attorney General wants to smash the daylights out of a taxpayer, well, let his own attorneys get on the other side. I always liked that when I was in school, because no matter how it turned out, I won. Any other questions?
Stephen, are you saying Rob McKenna's not doing his job?
Well, what I'm saying is that in this particular instance, Rob was caught between a rock and a hard spot. The rock being Chris Gregoire, the hard spot being all the attorneys that were employed before he got there inside the office. Now, look, I can't give Rob a clean slate on the issue. I think he should have been closer involved in this case to try to push back a little bit on the Department of Health. But you got to remember, Rob went after Obama on the same issue, right? He joined a lawsuit to have the federal mandate knocked down, while his office is prosecuting with all vigor to have the mandate enforced in the state. Same basic edict. So it really is, it's a difficult situation, but the Stormins case presents a huge difficulty for Rob, because if he could control the office, he would direct him to get rid of it. Now, one of the things that I would do, that I haven't told Rob about this, but if he's listening in, what he should do is he should tell the Department of Health, look, here's the situation. You guys have pushed for a wrongful appeal. The court has already told you that it's unconstitutional. I'm in complete agreement that it's unconstitutional. And because you are demanding that we can continue this lawsuit, you're acting ultra-virus to your oath as a state officer who took an oath to obey and support the Constitution. That's ultra-virus, which makes you personally liable for the damages. And I'm going to come forward with that opinion if you want to continue to push this case. All of a sudden, when it's not the taxpayers' money that's on the hook, but their money personally, you'd see a different decision.
Stephen, there was a debate the other night, and you weren't part of it. How is it that you weren't included?
Well, the reason I wasn't included was because they knew they could not stand up to the stress of having to debate me. And as a result, I've declared myself the victor. They're welcome to appeal that at another jurisdiction. No, the problem is that there are forces at work inside the Republican Party that are under the impression that they get to anoint the leadership in this state.
Right.
And we just don't have to take it.
Is Kirby Wilbur part of that?
Kirby is... Look, put yourself in Kirby's shoes for a few minutes, okay? Okay, you're now the head of the Washington State Republican Party. Okay, now govern that animal, right? That's like herding cats, right? And, so Kirby has his hands full. But, I'll just say this. Look, there was a machine, really the RNC has a governance that takes place out of Washington, D.C. So faceless, nameless people that we don't know, right? And they have an agenda that they have never disclosed. When we were down at the Republican convention, there was a group of delegates that sat in there in the hot box for 2 days, sweating out 3 days, sweating out the platform planks. Each plank, they're hammering it, they're debating it, they're going over, it's hour after hour after hour, plank after plank after plank. They get done with this platform, and these Republican rhinos say, platform, that's a couple of people's opinion. I don't have to follow that. Our platform has said for years that marriage is between one man and one woman. How does Reagan Dunn vote for same-sex marriage?
Yeah.
And then put the R next to his name. How does he do it? He does it by walking into that room where they're sweating out those planks and just stepping on the paper. Yeah, right, I got it. I see what you're saying. And that's what happens. That's what happens when you have somebody step on the platform planks like that. But the problem is when you have an RNC edict coming out of D.C., people that we don't even know. Who's sitting in that room? Who sits in that room in D.C. and says, I want you to put the pressure to make sure that guy doesn't get any delegates? Who made that edict? Who said that? How come we don't get to see him? How come they don't show up here? Why do they get to drive the local ship? And we don't get to drive it. Right. It's like I told one guy at one convention I was speaking, I said, look, there are two kinds of candidates in the Republican Party. There are those that are anointed and those that get 5 minutes. There are those that are selected and those that are trying to get elected. And that's the reality of it. But the truth is that we as Washingtonians have the right to do whatever we want to do. Okay, ultimately you walk into that ballot box and say, well, you know what? They said I have to vote this way, but I'm not going to do it. Sorry. My pencil, my hand, I get to strike the vote the way I want to do it. That's very important. And particularly now, because we're in an environment now, I don't know how you guys look at it. I don't want to live in a state that's got 20% unemployment, where half the state will take down a politician if he dares to threaten, what do they call that, the card, the EMP or the, what's the food stamp card? The EBT, is that what it's called?
Yeah.
EBT.
Electronic benefits card.
Yeah, you say, well, I'm going to take down the electronic benefits card. You're out of office. Bye, adios. Because that gravy train isn't going to stop, right? Now, that's the point we're at. I remember when I first came into Washington, man, this place was jumping. Microsoft stock was screaming up, and every time you turn around, they'd have to split the stock again, and it kept screaming up after that. Remember that? And then there was a question of whether or not Boeing stock could compete with it. Those were the good old days, right? But we could have all that back. We could have employment back. We could have it back. But you have to go back to freedom to do it. You got to get rid of the socialism and the progressive stuff. All that stuff has got to go. And you have to go back to being a moral society. Because when you're a moral society, you don't need the extra reins of government. When nobody steals from each other, do you have to have 20 cops in the town? No. And that's where we need to go. We have to go back to recreate that social order. So anyway, where the IRNC is concerned, I'm infuriated with what goes on. Ayn Rand used to call it the nameless faceless. Paying homage to the nameless faceless. We don't even know who it is, but we obey. Not this group. I know this group. Rebellious group. But anyway, it's good for you. It's really great for us to be standing up as a people and to be standing up here in Snohomish County. It's just a simple, this is the truth about Americans. It's that, you can put a lot of shackles on us, but ultimately we're going to stand up and say, hey, that's it.
Do you think the lawsuit that group has brought against the RNC will go anywhere?
Yes. I can tell you, here's the problem. The thing with the RNC, and I know what you're talking about, but there is case law. The Supreme Court ruled a few years back that the RNC is a state actor. Now, that's a very critical view, because when you say that the RNC is a state actor, then federal laws, 42 U.S.C. 1983 in specific, applies to those actions, which means that you can get damage because they are infringing on your First Amendment rights as applied to the states under the 14th Amendment. That's the basic legal standard. And as a consequence, yes, it does have legs.
Can you touch
touch base on the 10th Amendment and Homeland Security and the 100-mile border?
That's such a great question, because I can tell you there's so many federal infringements right now, and Homeland Security is a huge infringement. You know, Homeland Security, and I want to get to this, but when you think about how we got the scanners in the airport, it was a result of a guy paying cash for a one-way ticket in Amsterdam, the most notorious airport in the world, with no passport, on the terrorist watch list. And he got on the plane. Now, does that sound like an inside job to you? From my point of view, it was either an inside job, in which case everybody gets fired, or it was the highest level of incompetency ever seen in the security field, in which case everybody gets fired. But nonetheless, we get stuck with these scanners. Now, the scanners are part and parcel of a federal overreach under Obama, and it's part of terrorizing the population. The HSA has been given unbridled authority pursuant to an executive order and a rogue order from the EPA to move within 100 miles of the border to execute against American citizens. This means when you're driving out here to Seaver-Woolley, you could be driving along the road and all of a sudden, boom, there's 4 black SUVs. Stop. Prove to us you're an American. What do you mean? Let me see your papers. So you pull out your Washington driver's license. Well, I got a Washington driver's license right here. Well, we know that 400,000 of those have been issued to people with no social security number. You got anything better than that to prove you're an American? Where's your birth certificate? Don't ever raise that question in public, by the way. Are you going to carry your passport to drive to Seaver-Woolley? Now, the edict says 100 miles from the border. That means 100 miles in from the coastland, which goes almost all the way to Yakima, and 100 miles down from Canada, which goes south of Spokane. So it's Yakima and the Tri-Cities that's outside that particular region of HSA control. Total violation of posse comitatus, which provides for no military authority to be used against the American public. But Obama has done this. Complete trouncing of the Constitution and a trouncing of rights and freedoms. He's done this here, and it's going on. You go right up to Bellingham right now and talk to people that are in Blaine, in that area, and ask them how many times there are roadblocks away from the border. The Canadians will tell you they get stopped all the time.
We got border patrol going past our house all the time. We live on Highway 9, north of Seaver-Woolley. They got cars parked all over the place at times.
And the thing is that under the 10th Amendment, here's how the 10th Amendment works. Under the 10th Amendment, the state has the right to sue. Now, I wrote some of this stuff for the Patriots Union about 2.5 years ago that was later adopted by 14 states. The 10th Amendment rubric is that all rights are that not granted or enumerated to the federal government are reserved to the states or to the people. Under the 10th Amendment, we have a right as a state to say, look, we are a Republican form of government. We meet the constitutional boundaries. Under our act of cession that brought us into the Union, we have the right to say what will be the governance inside this state. Amendment 3 of the U.S. Constitution, right? When you take constitutional law at law school, they never teach Amendment 3. Why not? No soldier shall be quartered in someone's house. But when the federal government creates an order of brown shirts that has your children trying to turn against you, that's quartering a soldier in your house. Now the fact is that Homeland Security violating posse comitatus and the Transportation Safety Authority, the TSA, violating posse comitatus and other felonies that they're committing, all of those crimes can be sequestered by the state, but the state has to drag the feds into court. This can be done under the 10th Amendment, and we have to assert that right. Now there's other attorney generals that are doing this, like I say, Cuccinelli out of Virginia. There's guys out of Oklahoma that are doing this, and of course they're being punished by Eric Holder, who is an unindicted co-conspirator in felony murder in a gun-walking thing called Fast and Furious. But Eric Holder has the audacity to sue the state of Arizona and the audacity to sue some of these attorney generals that are standing up to him. It's a rogue criminal cabal. And so we as a state have to stand up to it. Now it's a difficult proposition. And one of the questions that you have to ask yourself as a taxpayer is, are we going to spend a lot of frivolous money on this? Or are we're going to concentrate the effort to look at what's going to be the most poignant thrust to take down the establishment? Now this is where I got to give Rob McKenna, kudos on what he did with the healthcare deal. That was a spear right to the heart. And if the Supreme Court rules like we're hoping they're going to rule, which is to kick out the entire healthcare mandate, all of it, if they do that, it's a huge victory and a massive setback for Mr. Obama.
If you are stopped by Homeland Security within the 100-mile, is there something you can say to Homeland Security just to tell them blow off?
Yeah, well, what you want to tell them is the first thing you want to do is pull up your smartphone and start videoing. Pull up your smartphone.
Article something in the state constitution?
Yes, it's Article 1, Section 14 that says all military authority will be subordinate to civilian authority in the state of Washington. That's number one.
They can unlawfully take your phone away, though, can they not?
Well, that's right, it would be unlawful, but the fact of the matter is you can record. You can record them in the middle of what they're doing. Get out your smartphone and start videoing. And then tell them, I want to know, what was your reasonable suspicion for stopping me? You have a constitutional obligation to make a Terry stop. What was your constitutional authority for stopping me? Go ahead and answer.
Ask them for their oath of office as well. They have to give you that by law.
Hey, who's doing the question answering around here? But thank you, Kelly. Yes, the oath of office, and also, but you want to document who it is and what's going on, and video. I mean, look, the videos, even though videos are hard, but it's totally constitutionally protected, and it is the best tool to use because they're videoing you. Any other questions tonight?
Can you tell us a little bit more about Agenda 21, what the status is in Washington State, and do the various towns, what authority do they have to put some teeth into this?
Yeah, this is a really good question because Agenda 21, people say, 3 years ago even, Agenda 21 was hypothetical. But it's not hypothetical anymore. It's on the ground all over the state of Washington. County governments and city governments are adopting ICLEI standards, and the Agenda 21 forces are moving through with non-governmental organizations, NGOs, and other entities that are coming in and usurping county power, city power, state power, and the cities and the state governments are going, well, it's all global warming, which is really a nice thing to think about. When I hear somebody say, I've heard some of the candidates say that they believe in global warming. Listen, for me, that's a total disqualifier. It's the last 3 years have been the coldest years in over 100 years. 3 years ago was the coldest year in 100 years. It killed people all over Asia. It was so cold. The ice caps are expanding like you wouldn't believe. There is no articulated global warming. But more importantly, it was Dixie Lee Ray, back in 1981, talked about this issue. And she said, look, this is the truth when they say, well, your carbon footprint. Yeah. When somebody calls me a carbon footprint, you know what they're telling me? You don't have a right to life. Your life is a state-granted privilege that we are marking in how much carbon output you have. I had a guy 4 years ago call me a carbon criminal and said I should be executed under a Nuremberg-type protocol because I was denying global warming. Okay? I'm not kidding you.
They've changed it now to climate change.
Well, they had to call it climate, and I agree with climate change. You got spring, summer, fall, winter.
Not on Western Washington.
Well, listen, up in Alaska, we even had climate change in Alaska. We had 3 seasons up there. Last winter, this winter, next winter. But the reality is that, look, the climate change protocol, all that rhetoric is a farce. But when you hear somebody say, we have to do something about climate change, what they're talking about is reclassifying your right to life to a privilege that's going to be in the hands of a super elite in an international governing force like the United Nations who will decide whether or not you live or die. We looked at this. We said, we want to sequester some carbon credits that we can use as an offset. So we can do like Al Gore and sell carbon credits. Well, how do you get carbon credits? Well, let's see. Let's go buy up all of the lives that were left of all the people that were executed in China. There's carbon credits. How about all of the kids that were aborted in Russia? There's a whole bunch of carbon credits. I want you to think about that. What is the offset to your living? Somebody else dying. and they want you to pay money to celebrate somebody else's premature